The rope snapped like a gunshot through the Arizona morning, and Fiona Edwards felt her stomach drop as the bridge beneath her lurched sideways, splintering wood screaming into the canyon below. She had crossed this bridge 100 times in the 3 months since arriving in Apache Junction, carrying supplies from the general store to the schoolhouse, where she taught reading and arithmetic to minors' children. The structure had always seemed sturdy enough, spanning the narrow gorge that cut through the red rock landscape like a wound. But the spring floods had weakened the supports, and now she clung to a single rope railing as planks fell away beneath her feet, tumbling 50 feet down to where Silver Creek churned white and furious over jagged stones. Fiona's carpetbag slipped from her grasp, disappearing into the foam below. She wrapped both arms around the rope, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. The bridge swayed violently, more wood giving way, and she knew with terrible certainty that she had perhaps seconds before the whole thing collapsed entirely. "Do not move." The voice came from somewhere behind her, calm and low and steady as bedrock. "Stay completely still." She turned her head just enough to see him. A tall man in dust-covered clothes sat astride a paint horse at the edge of the bridge, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with barely a sound despite his size. He was perhaps 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of careful grace that suggested he knew exactly how dangerous the moment was. "The bridge cannot hold us both," Fiona said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to keep it level. She was 23 years old and had traveled all the way from Boston to teach in this rough territory, determined to prove she was made of sterner stuff than her family believed. "She would not die screaming. Then it is fortunate I do not plan to stand on it." The man unwound a lasso from his saddle with practiced hands. "My name is Zachary Stone. When I throw this rope, you catch it and tie it around your waist. Can you do that?" "I think so." Her fingers were cramping from gripping the rope so tightly, but she nodded. "Yes, good. On 3. He began swinging the lasso, building momentum. 1, 2, 3. The rope sailed through the air, and Fiona released one hand from her death grip to snatch it. For one horrible moment she thought she had missed, but her fingers closed around the rough hemp, and she pulled it toward her. Her hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to wrap the rope around her waist and tie the knot her father had taught her on the docks back home. "It is done," she called out. Zachary Stone had already wrapped his end around his saddle horn. He stepped back to his horse, gathering the reins. "When the bridge falls, I am going to pull you up. Keep your arms close and try to protect your head." "Wait, what do you mean when?" The rest of her question dissolved into a scream as the final support beam cracked with a sound like thunder. The world tilted, everything falling away, and suddenly she was airborne, tumbling toward the creek and the rocks in certain death. Then the rope went taut around her middle, driving the air from her lungs, and she jerked to a stop that felt like being kicked by a mule. She spun slowly, suspended over the gorge, watching pieces of the bridge splash into the water below. Her whole body ached from the impact, but she was alive. She was alive because a stranger had thrown her a rope. "I am going to pull you up now," Zachary called down. "It is going to hurt." He was not wrong. She scraped against the canyon wall as he hauled her upward, his horse backing away from the edge step by steady step. Rock tore at her dress and the skin beneath it. Her hip struck a jutting stone hard enough to bring tears to her eyes. But she kept her arms close and her head down, and after what felt like hours but could only have been minutes, strong hands grabbed her shoulders and pulled her over the lip of the gorge onto solid ground. Fiona lay on her back in the red dirt, staring up at the pale blue Arizona sky, breathing hard. Everything hurt. She could feel blood trickling down her arm where the rocks had scraped her, and her ribs ached from where the rope had caught her, but she was alive. "Are you injured badly?" Zachary Stone knelt beside her, his face visible now that they were on level ground. He had gray eyes the color of storm clouds, weathered skin from years under the sun, and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He looked to be perhaps 30, give or take a few years. His expression was serious, focused, but there was something gentle in the way he examined her for injuries. "I do not think so," Fiona managed. "Bruised, scraped, nothing broken. You are bleeding." He was already pulling a bandana from his pocket, pressing it against the cut on her arm. His hands were rough with calluses, but surprisingly careful. "I have a camp a mile from here. I can clean this properly there." "The schoolhouse," Fiona said. "The children will be waiting." "The children will have to wait longer. That cut needs tending or it will fester." He said it matter-of-factly, as though there could be no argument, and perhaps there could not. Fiona knew enough about frontier medicine to know he was right. She let him help her to her feet. Her legs shook, threatening to buckle, and Zachary steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Easy. You have had a shock. Your body needs time to understand it is safe." "Thank you," Fiona said. "Thank you for saving my life, Mr. Stone." Something flickered in those gray eyes, gone too quickly for her to identify. Any decent man would have done the same. But they both knew that was not true. There were plenty of men in Apache Junction who would have kept riding, not wanting to risk themselves for a woman they did not know. Fiona had learned in her 3 months here that the territory made some men hard, and others cruel, and decent men were rarer than gold. Zachary's camp was exactly what she expected from a man who looked like he spent most of his life outdoors. A small fire pit surrounded by stones, a bedroll laid out near a stand of juniper trees, a simple shelter made of canvas stretched between branches to provide shade from the brutal afternoon sun. His horse, which he had introduced as Dusty, drank from a small creek that ran through the campsite. "Sit," Zachary said, gesturing to a log near the fire pit. He was already gathering supplies from his saddlebags, pulling out a bottle of whiskey clean cloth and a small tin of what looked like salve. Fiona sat, wincing as her bruised ribs protested. She looked down at herself and nearly laughed at the state of her dress. The blue calico that she had pressed so carefully that morning was now torn in a dozen places, streaked with dirt and blood. Her mother would have fainted to see her only daughter in such a state. "This will hurt," Zachary said, kneeling in front of her with the whiskey. "But it will hurt worse if infection sets in." "I understand." She braced herself, but still gasped when he poured the alcohol over the long scrape on her arm. It felt like liquid fire, burning all the way down to the bone. She bit her lip hard enough to taste blood. "You are tougher than you look," Zachary said. There might have been the ghost of approval in his voice. He worked quickly, cleaning the wound, applying the salve, and wrapping her arm with strips of clean cloth. His movements were efficient, practiced. "You have done this before," Fiona observed. "I was a soldier once, in the war." He did not elaborate on which side, and Fiona did not ask. The war had been over for 18 years now, since 1865, but its wounds still ran deep across the country. Here in Arizona Territory, people generally kept their wartime allegiances to themselves. "And now?" she asked. "Now I am a man with a horse and a camp." He finished tying off the bandage and sat back on his heels. "I scout sometimes for the cavalry, hunt game, do odd jobs when I need supplies. Mostly I keep to myself." There was a loneliness in those words that Fiona recognized because she felt it herself. She had come west for adventure, for purpose, to escape a life in Boston that felt like slowly suffocating. but she had not realized how isolated she would feel, how much she would miss having someone to truly talk to. The other women in Apache Junction were kind enough, but they viewed her as an oddity, a city girl playing at frontier life. And the men either avoided her as too educated or bothered her with unwanted attention. "I am a teacher," Fiona said. "I came from Boston 3 months ago. The town needed someone to teach the children, and I needed to be somewhere that was not Boston." Zachary looked at her with those storm-gray eyes, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see straight through to her bones. Running from something or running toward something? Both, I suppose. She had not meant to be so honest, but there was something about him that invited honesty. Or perhaps it was just the shock of nearly dying. "My family wanted me to marry a banker named Henry Thompson. He was 45 years old, wealthy, and profoundly boring. I told them I would rather teach in the wildest territory I could find than spend my life serving tea to Henry Thompson's business associates. And here you are. Here I am." She looked down at her torn dress, her bandaged arm, and felt a sudden, unexpected laugh bubble up in her chest. "Nearly killed by a broken bridge my first season. My mother would say it serves me right." Zachary did not smile exactly, but something softened in his expression. "Your mother would probably say anything is better than dying. You do not know my mother. She has very strong opinions about propriety and proper behavior." But Fiona was smiling despite herself. The fear that had gripped her on the bridge was finally loosening its hold, replaced by something bright and giddy. Relief, probably. The simple joy of being alive. They sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the creek and the wind in the junipers. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that did not need filling with empty words. Finally, Zachary stood and offered her his hand. "I will take you back to town," he said. "You should rest. Tomorrow you can send word to the children's families about the bridge. They will understand." The ride back to Apache Junction took less than an hour, with Fiona seated behind Zachary on his horse. She had to hold onto his waist to keep from sliding off, and she was very aware of the solid warmth of him, the easy way he sat in the saddle as though he had been born there. He did not speak during the ride, and neither did she, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. When they reached the small house she rented at the edge of town, Zachary helped her down from the horse. His hands spanned her waist easily, steadying her until her feet found the ground. "Thank you," Fiona said again. "I owe you my life, Mr. Stone." "Zachary," he corrected quietly. "And you owe me nothing. Just be more careful." "I will." She hesitated, not wanting him to leave yet but not knowing what else to say. "Will you be in Apache Junction long?" "A few days. I need to resupply before heading back out." He gathered Dusty's reins, preparing to leave. "Perhaps I could buy you dinner," Fiona said quickly. "To thank you properly. Tomorrow evening at the hotel restaurant." Zachary looked at her for a long moment, and Fiona held her breath, suddenly very aware that she was being forward in a way her mother would have found mortifying. But she did not care. There was something about this quiet man with the sad eyes that made her want to know more, to understand what had made him choose a life of solitude. "All right," Zachary said finally. "Tomorrow evening." He rode away before she could say anything else, leaving Fiona standing in front of her small house with a bandaged arm and a feeling in her chest like birds taking flight. The next day, Fiona spent the morning composing letters to the families of her students, explaining about the bridge and postponing lessons until it could be repaired or a new route found. The widow Henderson, who ran the boarding house, promised to have her son deliver the letters. She also spent considerable time fussing over Fiona's injuries and expressing shock that she had been so reckless as to cross a damaged bridge. "You could have been killed. Mrs. Henderson said for the third time, pressing another cup of tea into Fiona's hands. What would your family say if we had to send them a letter saying you died in some canyon? They would probably say it was inevitable, Fiona replied dryly. But she thanked Mrs. Henderson for the tea and the concern, which was genuine even if it was suffocating. By afternoon, word had spread through Apache Junction about the bridge collapse and Fiona's rescue. Several people stopped by to check on her, including Martha Wilson, one of the few women in town close to Fiona's age. Martha was married to the owner of the general store and had a baby daughter who she carried everywhere in a sling. "I heard a stranger pulled you out of the canyon," Martha said, settling into the chair by the window while baby Grace slept against her chest. "Is it true he lassoed you like a runaway calf, something like that?" Fiona could not help but smile at the memory, though at the time it had been terrifying. "His name is Zachary Stone. He is a scout. A drifter, more like." Martha's expression turned disapproving. "My husband says he is in town every few months but never stays long. Keeps to himself. Probably has a past he is hiding from. Or perhaps he simply prefers his own company." Fiona felt oddly defensive of Zachary, though she barely knew him. Martha gave her a knowing look. "You are having dinner with him tonight. I heard it from Sally at the hotel." Of course she had. In a town the size of Apache Junction, privacy was a rare commodity. "I am buying him dinner to thank him for saving my life. It would be rude not to." Hum. Martha was clearly unconvinced that gratitude was Fiona's only motivation. "Just be careful. Men like that, they are not the settling type. And you, for all your talk of independence, you are still a woman who needs to think about her future." Fiona wanted to argue, but there was enough truth in Martha's words to make her uncomfortable. She did not regret leaving Boston, did not regret choosing teaching over marriage to Henry Thompson. But she was lonely in a way she had not expected to be. And Zachary Stone, with his quiet strength and sad eyes, had stirred something in her that she did not quite know how to name. That evening she dressed in her best remaining dress, a green cotton with modest lace at the collar. Her arm still ached where she had scraped it, and her ribs protested when she bent to button her boots, but she felt a flutter of anticipation that made the discomfort worthwhile. Zachary was already waiting when she arrived at the hotel restaurant, standing near the entrance with his hat in his hands. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his dark hair still damp from washing, his clothes free of trail dust. He looked uncomfortable in the crowded dining room as though he wanted to bolt for the door. "Thank you for coming," Fiona said, touching his arm lightly. "I was not sure you would." "I said I would." He said it simply, as though keeping his word was the most natural thing in the world. Perhaps for him it was. They sat at a corner table, away from the curious stares of the other diners. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Apache Junction, which was to say it had tablecloths and actual menus instead of just serving whatever the cook had made that day. Fiona ordered the roast chicken and Zachary requested the beefsteak, and they sat in slightly awkward silence until the food arrived. "Tell me about scouting," Fiona said, searching for a safe topic of conversation. "Is it dangerous work?" "Sometimes." Zachary cut his steak with careful precision. "Mostly it is riding through empty country, watching for signs of trouble. Apache raids, bandits, that sort of thing. Not as dangerous as it used to be, with Geronimo surrendered 3 years back." "You enjoy it?" He considered the question seriously, as though no one had ever asked him before. "I enjoy being alone. I enjoy the desert. The work is just the excuse." "I think I understand that," Fiona said softly. "Everyone back home thought I was mad to come out here. They said I was throwing my life away to teach children who would probably end up working in mines or saloons regardless." But I needed to prove I could do something that mattered, something that was mine. Zachary looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. And has it mattered? I think so. I hope so. She thought of little Tommy Harris learning to read last month, sounding out words with such fierce concentration. Of Mary Chen's face lighting up when she finally understood long division. Some of those children have never been to school before. They are smart and curious and deserve a chance to learn. If I can give them that, then yes, it matters. Then you did not throw your life away. Zachary took a sip of his coffee. You spent it on something worthwhile. That is more than most people can say. They talked more easily after that. Fiona told him about Boston, about her large family with their rigid expectations, about the suffocating feeling of knowing exactly what every day of the rest of her life would look like if she stayed. Zachary talked less about his past, but he told her about the desert, about the places he had been, about the way the land changed from red rock to white sand to mountains that scratched the sky. Why do you stay out there alone? Fiona asked finally when their plates were empty and they were lingering over coffee. Do you not get lonely? Zachary was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low enough that she had to lean in to hear him. I was married once, during the war. She died of fever while I was off fighting. By the time I got home, she had been in the ground for 2 months. He stared down at his coffee cup. I decided then that it was easier to be alone than to risk losing someone again. Fiona's heart ached for him. She reached across the table without thinking, covering his scarred hand with her own. I am sorry. That must have been terrible. It was a long time ago. But the pain in his voice said it might as well have been yesterday. He looked at her hand on his and something shifted in his expression. I should not have told you that. It is not a fit story for dinner conversation. I am glad you told me, she meant it. It helps me understand you better. What is there to understand? I am a man who lives alone and prefers it that way. I do not think that is true. Fiona said it gently, but firmly. I think you are a man who has been alone so long he has forgotten what it is like to have someone care about him. Zachary pulled his hand away, not roughly, but deliberately. You should be careful, Miss Edwards. I am not a man who can give you what you are looking for. And what do you think I am looking for? Someone to build a life with. Someone steady and reliable who will be there every morning when you wake up. He stood, leaving money on the table for the meal. I am not that man. I never will be. He left before Fiona could respond, walking out of the restaurant with long strides that said he wanted to put distance between them as quickly as possible. She sat alone at the table, feeling the curious stares of the other diners, and wondered if Martha had been right after all. But when she walked home that night, alone under the stars that blazed across the Arizona sky like scattered diamonds, Fiona found herself thinking not about Zachary's words but about the way his hand had felt under hers. Warm, solid, real. And about the pain in his eyes when he spoke of his wife, a grief so deep it had shaped the entire course of his life. She understood now why he lived the way he did. But understanding did not make her want to see him again any less. If anything, it made her want it more. The next morning brought news that made Fiona forget about her complicated feelings for Zachary Stone, at least temporarily. Tom Wilson, Martha's husband, came to her door before breakfast with his hat in his hands and worry creasing his face. The bridge is completely gone, he said without preamble. The whole thing collapsed into the canyon sometime during the night. Must have been damaged worse than we thought from yesterday. That is terrible, Fiona said, but surely it can be rebuilt. That is the problem. The town council met this morning. They say there is no money for a new bridge. The mine payroll is late, which means the territorial government did not get its taxes, which means no funds for repairs. Tom sighed heavily. Without that bridge, the children on the east side of the canyon cannot get to school, and you cannot get to them. Not unless you ride 5 miles north to the next crossing, which would add hours to every trip. Fiona's mind raced. How many children live on the east side? 7, I think. The Harris family, the Chens, the Rodriguezes. Working families, all of them. They need their children in school, Miss Edwards. Those kids are learning, really learning. My Martha says you have worked miracles with them. Then I will go to them, Fiona said firmly. If they cannot come to the schoolhouse, I will hold classes on the east side. Someone must have a barn or a spare room we could use. That is generous of you, but the problem remains. You still have to cross the canyon yourself. The northern crossing is not much better than swimming across, especially this time of year with the spring melt coming down from the mountains. Before Fiona could respond, a familiar voice spoke from behind Tom Wilson. There is another way. They both turned to see Zachary Stone standing in the dusty street, his horse beside him. He must have been preparing to leave town, his saddlebags packed and bedroll tied behind his saddle, but something had made him stop. Mr. Stone, Tom said, nodding respectfully. We heard what you did yesterday, pulling Miss Edwards out of the canyon. The whole town is grateful. There is a path, Zachary continued, ignoring the thanks. An old Apache trail about a mile south of the collapsed bridge. It is steep and narrow, but it leads down to the canyon floor and back up the other side. People could cross on foot. How long does it take? Fiona asked. About an hour if you know the way and do not mind heights. Less than half the time it would take to reach the northern crossing. Tom looked skeptical. An Apache trail. I do not know if folks would feel safe using it. The Apache have been gone from this area for years, Zachary said with a hint of impatience. The trail is just a trail, stone and dirt same as any other. Could you show me? Fiona asked. If I am going to teach the children on the east side, I need to know how to get there safely. Zachary looked at her for a long moment, and Fiona had the sense that he was weighing something in his mind, making a decision that went beyond simply showing her a trail. Finally, he nodded. Get your things. We leave in 10 minutes. The trail was everything Zachary had promised and worse. It clung to the canyon wall like a scar, barely wide enough for one person to walk comfortably. In some places, Fiona had to press her back against the red rock and shuffle sideways, trying not to look down at the churning creek far below. Her injured arm ached from gripping the stone, and her heart hammered in her chest, but she kept moving because Zachary was ahead of her, calm and sure-footed as a mounting goat. You are doing well, he called back to her. Just keep your eyes on where you are stepping, not on the drop. I am trying. Her voice came out thin and breathless. How do the Apache make this look so easy, practice, and probably no fear of heights? He had reached a wider spot in the trail and stopped, waiting for her to catch up. When she did, he steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. We are halfway down. The hardest part is behind you. Fiona looked up into his face and saw something there she had not seen before. Not pity exactly, but a kind of understanding, as though he knew what it cost her to keep going despite her fear. Why are you helping me? She asked. Because you asked. He said it as though it were obvious, and because those children deserve their teacher even if she is too stubborn to stay safe. I am not stubborn. I am determined. Same thing, different words. But there was the ghost of a smile on his face as he said it, and Fiona felt that flutter in her chest again, the one that had nothing to do with fear of falling. They made it to the canyon floor without incident and followed the creek east for a short distance before beginning the climb up the other side. This trail was slightly easier, with more handholds and wider ledges, but it was still exhausting work. By the time they reached the top, Fiona's legs were shaking and sweat had soaked through the back of her dress despite the cool morning air. "I cannot do this every day," she said, collapsing onto a flat rock near the trail head. "I would be too tired to teach by the time I arrived." "You would get stronger," Zachary said. He sat beside her, not even breathing hard despite having made the climb with far more weight in his saddlebags than she carried. "The human body adapts to what you ask of it," spoken like someone who has never worn a corset. But Fiona was smiling despite her exhaustion. There was something exhilarating about what they had just done, about proving she could handle the trail even if it was difficult. They sat in silence for a while, looking out over the canyon at the town of Apache Junction on the far side. From up here, it looked small and fragile, a collection of wooden buildings clinging to the desert as though one strong wind might blow them all away. It was a hard land, unforgiving and beautiful in equal measure, and Fiona was surprised to realize she was glad she had come here. "I thought you were leaving today," she said finally. "I was." Zachary picked up a small stone and turned it over in his hands. "Then I heard about the bridge and the children, and I thought about you trying to cross at the northern ford in the spring floods. And you stayed to show me the trail." "Yes." "Why?" When he did not answer immediately, Fiona turned to look at him fully. "I thought you said you were not a man who could give me what I was looking for. I am not." His voice was rough. "But that does not mean I want to see you drown in a swollen creek or break your neck on a trail you do not know. Call it a debt paid if you like. You said you owed me your life yesterday. Now we are even." But they both knew it was more than that. Fiona could see it in the way he would not quite meet her eyes, in the tension in his shoulders. Zachary Stone was a man fighting himself, torn between the isolation he had built around his heart and something new trying to break through. "Will you stay a few more days?" Fiona asked. "I could use someone to help me set up the school on this side of the canyon, someone who knows the families here, who can help me understand what they need. I do not know the families here. Then we can learn together." Zachary looked at her then, really looked at her, and Fiona held his gaze without flinching. She knew she was being forward again, knew she was pushing him in a way that might drive him away entirely. But something in her refused to let him disappear back into the desert without trying. "3 days," Zachary said finally. "I will stay 3 days. After that I have to resupply and head back out. The cavalry is expecting my report. 3 days is enough." Fiona stood, brushing dust from her skirt. "Now let us go meet these children." The Rodriguez family lived in a small adobe house at the edge of the settlement on the east side of the canyon. Rosa Rodriguez was a widow who took in washing to support her 3 children, 2 boys and a girl who ranged in age from 7 to 12. When Fiona explained about the bridge and her plan to hold school on their side of the canyon, Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "My children, they love learning," she said in accented but clear English. "Miguel, he reads everything he can find. Maria wants to be a teacher like you. And little Carlos, he is so good with numbers. But I thought, with the bridge gone, they would lose their chance." "They will not lose anything," Fiona promised. "I just need a place to hold classes until the bridge can be rebuilt." "You can use our barn," Rosa said immediately. "It is small, but it is dry and there is room for desks. My sons, they will help clean it." And they did. Miguel and Carlos worked alongside Zachary for the rest of the day, sweeping out the barn and carrying in rough wooden benches from various neighbors. Maria picked wildflowers and put them in jars around the room, her face glowing with excitement. By the time the sun began to set, they had created a serviceable schoolroom, simple but sturdy. Fiona stood in the doorway, looking at what they had accomplished, and felt a swell of pride that had nothing to do with the beautiful schoolhouse she had left on the other side of the canyon. This was rougher, humbler, but it was born from community and determination, and that made it more precious. "You did good work today," Zachary said quietly. He stood beside her, his shoulder almost touching hers. "Those children are lucky to have you. I am lucky to have them." Fiona turned to face him. "Thank you for helping. I know this is not what you wanted to do with your time. Maybe it is what I needed to do." He said it so softly she almost missed it. Then, before she could respond, he was walking away toward where he had tied Dusty, leaving her standing in the doorway with her heart beating fast and the smell of wildflowers in the air. Over the next 3 days, Fiona fell into a routine that was both exhausting and exhilarating. She woke before dawn to make the crossing through the canyon, taught the East Side children in the morning, made the treacherous climb back for lunch, taught her West Side students in the afternoon in various homes since the schoolhouse was no longer accessible to all, and then returned to her own small house, so tired she could barely stand. Zachary was there for all of it. He carried her bag of books and supplies on the daily crossings, his sure hands steadying her when the trail became particularly difficult. He sat in the back of the makeshift classroom, supposedly mending tack or checking his supplies, but she caught him listening to her lessons more than once. He helped Tommy Harris with his reading when the boy struggled, his deep voice patient as he sounded out the words. And slowly, incrementally, he began to talk more, not about his past but about the present, about the red-tailed hawk he had seen hunting that morning, about the changes he noticed in the desert as spring deepened toward summer. Small things, but each one felt like a gift, a tiny piece of himself that he was willing to share. On the third evening, Fiona was sitting on the porch of her small house, watching the sun paint the sky orange and purple and gold when Zachary rode up. He had been scarce all afternoon, and she had assumed he was already making preparations to leave in the morning as he had promised. "I brought you something," he said, dismounting. He pulled a bundle from his saddlebag and handed it to her. Inside was a book, its leather cover worn soft with age. Fiona opened it carefully and saw beautifully detailed drawings of desert plants and animals, each one labeled with both common and scientific names. It was the kind of book that cost real money, not something she would have expected a drifter to own. "It belonged to my wife," Zachary said. "Catherine. She loved learning about the natural world. I have been carrying it with me for 15 years, never quite able to leave it behind, but never looking at it either." He paused, staring out at the darkening desert. "I thought maybe your students could use it. Learn something about the land they live in." Fiona ran her fingers over the careful drawings, seeing the love that had gone into every page. "Zachary, I cannot take this. It is too precious. Catherine would want it to be used. She would want children to learn from it." His voice was rough with emotion. "I think she would like knowing her book was teaching the next generation. Thank you." Fiona set the book aside carefully and stood. They were close now, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the fine lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. "You are a good man, Zachary Stone, no matter what you tell yourself. Fiona." Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a warning all at once. "I am still leaving tomorrow, I know. And I will be gone for weeks, maybe months. I know that too. Then why are you looking at me like that?" But his voice was gentler than his words, and he lifted one hand to brush a stray curl back from her face. "Because in 3 days, you have become important to me," Fiona said honestly. "Because I think you feel the same way, and you are fighting it because you are afraid of being hurt again. Because I am tired of people telling me what I should want and how I should feel, and right now I want to kiss you even if it is foolish and reckless, and you are leaving in the morning." Zachary went very still. For a long moment, He just looked at her, his gray eyes searching her face as though trying to memorize every detail. Then he cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her with a gentleness that made her heart ache. It was a careful kiss, tentative, as though he was out of practice or afraid she might break. But Fiona leaned into it, rising on her toes, and felt him relax fraction by fraction until he was really kissing her, his arms coming around her waist to pull her closer. She tasted coffee and something sweeter underneath, felt the scratch of his stubble against her skin, breathed in leather and sage and sun-warmed cotton. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "This is a mistake," he said, but he did not let her go, probably. Fiona smiled against his shoulder. "But I have discovered I am rather good at making mistakes as long as they are my own choice." They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms as the stars began to appear overhead. Fiona knew he would still leave in the morning, knew that whatever this was between them would have to survive weeks of separation and uncertainty. But she also knew that something real had taken root in the space between them, something worth fighting for. "Come back," she whispered into the gathering dark. "When your work is done, come back to Apache Junction." "Fiona, I do not know, come back to me," she said more firmly. "Not because you owe me anything or because I need rescuing. Come back because you want to, because you are ready to stop running from your own heart." Zachary was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. Then, finally, he nodded against her hair. "I will come back, I promise." He left before dawn the next morning, as silent as a shadow. Fiona woke to find a note tucked under her door, written in surprisingly neat handwriting. "You have bridged a gap I thought was permanent. Wait for me." And so she waited. The days stretched into weeks, and spring deepened into early summer. The territorial government finally released funds for a new bridge, and construction began under the supervision of an engineer from Tucson. But even after the bridge was finished and Fiona could consolidate her students back into one school, she continued to make the crossing through the canyon twice a week, teaching on both sides because the children on the east had grown to expect her. She grew stronger with all the climbing, her arms developing lean muscle, her lungs adapting to the thin air. Martha Wilson teased her about turning into a proper frontier woman, and Fiona supposed she was right. The girl who had left Boston 6 months ago would not have recognized herself now. But through it all, she thought of Zachary. She wondered where he was, if he was safe, if he thought of her as often as she thought of him. She read from Catherine's book to her students and imagined a woman she had never met, someone who had loved learning and the natural world, and a man named Zachary Stone. She hoped Catherine would not mind that she had fallen in love with that same man, that she would understand how hearts could break and, given time and care, learn to open again. 8 weeks after Zachary rode away, a telegram arrived at the general store addressed to Fiona Edwards. Tom Wilson brought it to her house personally, curiosity written all over his face, but Fiona thanked him and closed the door before opening it. The message was brief. "Returning next week. Have something to ask you. Wait for me. Z.S." Fiona read it 3 times, her heart hammering. She had no idea what Zachary wanted to ask her, but the fact that he was coming back at all felt like a miracle. She tucked the telegram into Catherine's book for safekeeping and tried not to count the days until the week was up. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, riding into Apache Junction on Dusty with his saddlebags full and his hat pulled low against the sun. Fiona was walking back from the school when she saw him, and her heart leaped so hard it was almost painful. She wanted to run to him, to throw her arms around him right there in the middle of the street, but she made herself walk at a normal pace, made herself breathe. Zachary dismounted when he saw her, and the look on his face made her stop breathing altogether. It was open in a way she had never seen, vulnerable and nervous and hopeful all at once. "Hello," Fiona said, because someone had to speak first. "Hello." He held his hat in his hands, turning it around and around. "You look well." "So do you." It was true. He looked tired from the road, but there was something different about him, something lighter. "Did you have a good trip?" "It was fine." "Long." He took a breath. "I missed you, every day, every mile. I missed you so much it hurt." Fiona's eyes filled with tears. "I missed you too. I have been thinking about what you said, about coming back because I want to, not because I have to." He stepped closer, and she could see the pulse beating fast in his throat. "I want to, Fiona. I want to come back to you, and I want to stay, if you will have me." "Zachary, let me finish." "Please." He was nervous, she realized. This strong, capable man who faced danger without flinching was nervous about what she might say. "I am not an easy man to love. I have spent too long alone. I am set in my ways, and I do not talk much, and I am probably going to frustrate you more often than not. But I will never lie to you, and I will never leave you wondering where you stand with me. And I will spend every day for the rest of my life trying to be the man you deserve." "You are already the man I want," Fiona said through her tears. "You do not need to be anyone else." "Is that a yes?" Hope and fear warred in his expression. "Yes, yes, I will have you, yes to all of it." Zachary closed the distance between them and kissed her right there in the street, in front of the general store and the saloon and anyone else who cared to look. Fiona kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, not caring about propriety or what people would say. This man had saved her life, and she had bridged the gap in his lonely heart, and whatever came next, they would face it together. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church, with Martha Wilson as Fiona's witness and Tom Wilson standing up for Zachary. Rosa Rodriguez and her children came, along with most of Fiona's students and their families. It was not the grand Boston wedding her mother had always imagined, with hundreds of guests and elaborate decorations. It was better. Zachary had taken a job as deputy sheriff, working alongside the aging Sheriff Morrison, who was grateful to have someone capable to help maintain order in Apache Junction and the surrounding territory. It was steady work, the kind that kept him in town more often than his old life of scouting. He still disappeared into the desert sometimes, when the silence and space called to him, but he always came back. Always. They lived in Fiona's small house at first, but Zachary spent his evenings building onto it, adding a larger bedroom and a study where Fiona could prepare her lessons. He built a bookshelf for Catherine's book and the growing collection of others they were accumulating. He built a porch swing where they sat together in the evenings, watching the sun set over the canyon, talking about their days or just existing in comfortable silence. Life settled into a rhythm that felt right. Fiona taught her students, watching them grow and learn. She started a small lending library, using books donated by families throughout the territory, giving her students access to worlds beyond Arizona. Zachary kept the peace, earning a reputation as fair but firm, the kind of lawman who gave people a chance to make better choices but did not tolerate those who preyed on the weak. They argued sometimes, both of them too stubborn for their own good. Fiona pushed Zachary to talk more about his feelings, to let her in even when it was hard. Zachary worried about Fiona working herself too hard, trying to teach every child in the territory personally. But they learned to compromise, to bend without breaking, to remember that love was not just the easy moments but the hard ones too. A year after their wedding, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She told Zachary one evening on their porch swing, the words tumbling out in a nervous rush, and watched his face transform with wonder. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He placed his hand on her still flat stomach with infinite gentleness. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Fiona asked, suddenly needing to hear him say it. Happy does not even begin to cover it. He pulled her close, tucking her against his side. "I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, Fiona. I thought I had used up my chance at a family. And now I have you, and soon we will have a child, and it feels like more than I deserve." "It is exactly what you deserve," Fiona said fiercely. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Zachary Stone." Their son was born in March of 1885, during a rare spring thunderstorm that shook the windows of their small house. Zachary paced outside the bedroom while Martha Wilson and Rosa Rodriguez helped with the delivery, nearly wearing a groove in the floorboards with his worry. But when Martha finally opened the door and told him he had a healthy baby boy, his face went white with relief. They named him Thomas, after Tom Wilson, who had become Zachary's closest friend, with the middle name of James after Zachary's father. He was a loud, hungry baby with his mother's dark curls and his father's serious gray eyes. Zachary held him with the same infinite gentleness he showed when handling the most delicate things, as though unable to believe this small, perfect person was real. "I do not know how to be a father," he confessed to Fiona late one night, with Thomas sleeping between them in the big bed. "What if I do everything wrong?" "Then you will learn, same as me," Fiona said, running her fingers through Thomas's soft hair. "We will figure it out together." And they did. Zachary was a patient, attentive father, taking Thomas with him on safe calls around town as soon as the boy was old enough, teaching him to ride almost before he could walk properly. Fiona watched them together and felt her heart swell with a love so profound, it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. This was what she had been searching for when she left Boston, even if she had not known it at the time. Not just purpose or independence, but family, belonging, home. 2 years later, they had a daughter they named Catherine Rose, after Zachary's first wife and Fiona's grandmother. Zachary cried when he held her for the first time, and Fiona knew he was thinking of the woman who had owned the book now proudly displayed in their living room. The woman whose death had set him on a path that eventually led to this second chance. "Thank you," he whispered, and Fiona knew he was not talking to her. Life continued its steady rhythm. Thomas started school with his mother as his teacher, a source of both pride and occasional embarrassment as he got older. Catherine toddled after her brother everywhere, determined to do everything he did despite being smaller. The house echoed with laughter and arguments and the everyday chaos of a growing family. Zachary was appointed sheriff after Morrison retired, a position he took seriously. He hired a young deputy named James Porter to help, mentoring him the way no one had mentored Zachary when he was young and adrift. Apache Junction grew from a rough mining town into a more established community, with a proper school building, a doctor's office, and even a small library that Fiona managed with the help of volunteers. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Fiona with a trip back through the canyon on the Apache Trail, where they had first grown close. Thomas was old enough to stay with Martha and Tom for the night, and baby Catherine went to Rosa Rodriguez, who doted on her as though she were another grandchild. They made the crossing at sunset, the canyon walls glowing orange and red in the dying light. Fiona was surprised by how easy the trail seemed now, her body remembering the path even though she rarely took it anymore with the bridge rebuilt and functioning. They reached the eastern rim and sat on the same flat rock where they had rested that first day. "Do you remember what you said to me here?" Zachary asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I said a lot of things. You said you could not make this crossing every day, that you would be too tired to teach. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face. You were wrong. You got stronger. You adapted. I had help. Fiona leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sage and home. I had you. We had each other. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. I never thanked you properly, for not giving up on me, for seeing past the walls I built and loving me anyway. Zachary, you do not need to thank me for that. Yes, I do. His voice was serious and tense. I was half a man when I met you, Fiona, just going through the motions of living, telling myself that alone was safer than risking my heart. But you showed me that safety is not the same as happiness, that some risks are worth taking. He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. You bridged the gap in my lonely heart, and you have filled it with more love and joy than I thought possible. So yes, I need to thank you. Every day for the rest of my life. Fiona's eyes filled with tears. After 5 years of marriage, this man could still move her to the core with his carefully chosen words. I love you, she said simply. Then, now, always. They stayed on the rim until full dark, wrapped in each other's arms under the vast Arizona sky. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out below. But to Fiona and Zachary, this moment was everything. Proof that broken bridges could be rebuilt, that lonely hearts could learn to love again, that two people from different worlds could find each other in the wilderness and create something beautiful. The years that followed brought both joy and sorrow, as years always do. Sheriff Morrison passed away peacefully in his sleep, and the whole town turned out for his funeral. Zachary's mother, who he had been estranged from since the war, wrote a letter asking to meet her grandchildren. It took Zachary weeks to respond, but eventually he did, and they made the long journey to New Mexico where she lived. The reunion was awkward and emotional, but it began a healing that Zachary had not known he needed. Fiona's own family remained distant, her mother still unable to forgive her for choosing teaching over marriage to Henry Thompson. But her younger sister Lily began writing secret letters, and eventually made her own escape to Arizona, finding work as a seamstress in Phoenix and visiting Apache Junction twice a year. The sisters grew close in a way they had never been as children, bonded by their shared choice to live life on their own terms. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as his mother and the outdoors as much as his father. Catherine was wild and fearless, climbing trees and catching lizards and driving both her parents to distraction. When she was 5, Fiona gave birth to another son, Daniel, who was quiet and observant and seemed to be studying the world around him from the moment he opened his eyes. The house that Zachary had built onto became too small, so they built a new one on a piece of land just outside town, with a view of the canyon and enough room for their growing family. Zachary designed it himself, with a large kitchen where Fiona could cook and can food, a study for her lesson planning and his sheriff's paperwork, and bedrooms enough for all 3 children plus a guest room for Lily's visits. They planted a garden that Fiona tended in the early mornings before school. They raised chickens and kept a milk cow that Catherine named Blossom. They built a life that was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, full of the small moments that make up a marriage. Morning coffee on the porch, Zachary's hand finding hers under the dinner table, the sound of their children's laughter echoing through the house. Arguments about money or discipline, or whose turn it was to check on a crying baby. The feel of Zachary's arms around her in the dark, steady and sure, after 20 years just as comforting as they had been after 20 days. On their 20th wedding anniversary, their children conspired with Tom and Martha Wilson to throw them a surprise party. Half the town showed up. People who had been touched by Fiona's teaching or helped by Zachary's fair hand as sheriff. There were speeches and toasts. Stories told about the early days when Apache Junction was rougher and wilder, when a Boston schoolteacher and a solitary cowboy had found each other across a broken bridge. Late in the evening, after the guests had gone home and the children were finally asleep, Fiona and Zachary walked down to the canyon edge. The moon was full, casting silver light across the landscape, turning the red rocks to pewter and shadow. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked quietly. "Giving up Boston for this life?" Fiona looked at him in genuine surprise. "Not for one single moment. Do you regret taking a chance on me?" "No." He pulled her close, and they stood at the canyon's edge, looking out at the vast desert stretching away into darkness. "I regret all the years I wasted before I met you, but everything from that day forward has been a gift. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they made the good parts matter more." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Fiona Stone. Thank you for rescuing me right back." They stood there for a long time, two people who had found each other at precisely the right moment, when they were both ready to take a leap into the unknown. The canyon spread out before them, no longer an obstacle but a reminder of where they had started, the distance they had crossed to reach each other. Years continued to pass, as they always do. Thomas went east to study law, breaking his mother's heart a little even as she glowed with pride. Catherine married a rancher from a neighboring county, a good man who could match her spirit and was not intimidated by her father's reputation. Daniel took over as sheriff when Zachary finally retired, proving just as fair and capable as his father had been. Zachary and Fiona grew old together in their house overlooking the canyon. Fiona taught until her 60th birthday, finally retiring when her eyes grew too weak to see the small print in books without difficulty. Zachary's hair went completely silver, and he developed a limp from an old injury that troubled him in cold weather. But he still rode Dusty's great-great-grandfoal down to the canyon most mornings, just to sit and think and breathe in the desert air. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their house filling with visiting children and chaos several times a year. Fiona baked cookies and told stories about the old days. Zachary taught the grandchildren to ride and track and read the weather. They argued about politics and religion, and whether Thomas should have named his eldest son Herbert, which both agreed was a terrible name but which Thomas claimed was honoring his late father-in-law. On a cool October morning in 1925, 42 years after Zachary had pulled Fiona from the collapsing bridge, they sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Fiona was reading aloud from a new novel while Zachary pretended to doze but was actually listening to every word. The morning was perfect, the kind of day that Arizona saved up for autumn, clear and cool and golden. "Zachary," Fiona said, setting down her book, "are you awake?" "Always when you are reading." He opened his eyes and smiled at her, that same careful smile that had stolen her heart so many decades ago. "What is on your mind?" "I was just thinking about how lucky we have been, how improbable it all was when you think about it. If the bridge had not collapsed that day, if you had not been riding past at exactly that moment, if I had chosen to stay home instead of crossing in the morning." "I have thought about that too," Zachary admitted. "All the tiny choices that had to align perfectly for us to find each other. It seems almost miraculous, or meant to be. Maybe both." He reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers with the ease of long practice. "Do you remember what I said to you on our 5th anniversary about you bridging the gap in my heart?" "I remember." "I did not understand then how right those words were. You did not just bridge the gap, Fiona. You rebuilt the whole foundation. You gave me a reason to believe in love again, in family, in the future. Everything good in my life for the past 4 decades has come from you." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes, though whether from emotion or just the tendency of old eyes to water, she could not say. "You did the same for me, you know. I thought I was looking for purpose when I came west, for meaningful work. And I found that. But I also found you, and you showed me that purpose and love were not separate things. That the most meaningful thing I would ever do was build a life with you." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the play of light on the canyon walls. The world had changed so much since that day in 1883. Apache Junction had electricity now, and automobiles were becoming common sights. There was talk of paving the main road, of attracting tourists to see the beautiful desert landscape. The wild west of their youth was fading into history, preserved now only in dime novels and exaggerated stories. But some things remained constant. The desert was still beautiful and harsh and unforgiving. The canyon still cut through the landscape like a scar. And the love between two people who had saved each other, who had chosen each other every day for 42 years, remained as strong as ever. Their children and grandchildren came to visit that weekend, a loud, chaotic gathering that filled the house with life and noise. Thomas had brought his wife and 3 children. Catherine arrived with her husband and their 4 kids, plus 2 grandbabies that made Fiona and Zachary great-grandparents twice over. Daniel came alone, his wife having passed away 2 years prior from influenza, but he seemed lighter than he had in months, healing slowly from his grief. They gathered around the big table that Zachary had built decades ago, eating pot roast and potatoes and arguing amiably about politics and religion, and whether the new sheriff in the neighboring county was doing an adequate job. Fiona watched her family, the legacy she and Zachary had built together, and felt a profound sense of contentment. After dinner, when the dishes were cleared and the children were playing outside, Zachary stood and tapped his glass for attention. The conversation died down, everyone turning to look at him with curiosity. It was not like him to make speeches. "I just wanted to say something," Zachary began, a little awkwardly. Public speaking had never been his strength. "I know I do not say it often enough, but I am grateful for all of you. For this family we have built. Your grandmother and I, we did not have the easiest start. We both came from loss and loneliness, but we found each other and we made this." He gestured around the table. "All of you are proof that love can heal old wounds, that broken bridges can be rebuilt, that lonely hearts can learn to trust again." There was a moment of silence, then Thomas stood and raised his glass. "To Mom and Dad, to 42 years of marriage and the best example of love any of us could ask for. To Mom and Dad," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Fiona reached for Zachary's hand under the table, squeezing tight. He squeezed back, and she knew without words that he was thinking what she was thinking. That this, right here, was the happy ending they had both secretly feared they would never have. That they had not just survived but thrived. That the risk they had taken on each other had paid off beyond their wildest dreams. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Fiona and Zachary lay in their bed, holding hands in the darkness. They had shared this bed for nearly 40 years, had made love and argued and comforted each other through countless nights within its frame. It was as familiar as breathing. "Fiona," Zachary said into the quiet, "if you had it to do over, would you change anything?" She thought about it seriously, reviewing their life together like turning the pages of a book. The hard years when money was tight and they argued about every expense. The grief when Zachary's mother passed away before they could fully reconcile. The terror of Thomas's bout with scarlet fever when he was 8, the long nights they sat by his bedside praying he would survive, the ordinary frustrations of raising children and building a marriage in a harsh land. "No," she said finally, "I would not change a single thing. Every hardship we faced made us stronger. Every mistake we made taught us something, and every joy was sweeter because we experienced it together." "Good," Zachary said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Because neither would I." They fell asleep like that, holding hands the way they had done for 42 years. Outside, the desert stretched away under the stars, ancient and eternal. The canyon cut through the landscape, bridged now by sturdy construction but still wild at its heart. And in their bed, two people who had saved each other slept peacefully, their hearts no longer lonely, their love as enduring as the red rocks themselves. Zachary Stone passed away peacefully in his sleep on a spring morning in 1928, 83 years old, and surrounded by the family he had never thought he would have. Fiona held his hand as he took his last breath, and though her heart broke at the loss, she was grateful they had been given so much time together. 45 years of marriage, 3 children, 9 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. A lifetime of love built on the foundation of a rescue that had gone both ways. She lived another 7 years, teaching the great-grandchildren to read and tending her garden and sitting on her porch in the evenings, remembering. She never remarried, never even considered it. Zachary Stone had been the love of her life, and she was content to live on the memories they had made together. When Fiona Edwards Stone died in 1935 at the age of 75, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were about the bridge. "Tell them," she whispered to Catherine, who was holding her hand. "Tell them about the bridge, how your father saved me and I saved him right back." And Catherine did tell the story, as did Thomas and Daniel. They told it to their children, who told it to theirs, passing down the tale of the Boston schoolteacher and the lonely cowboy who found each other at exactly the right moment, who proved that it was never too late to take a risk on love, who built a family and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The house they built still stands on the edge of Apache Junction, lovingly maintained by generations of their descendants. Catherine's book, the one that had belonged to Zachary's first wife, sits on the mantel in a place of honor. And every year on the anniversary of that day in April 1883, the Stone family gathers to remember the moment when everything changed, when a rope thrown across a canyon became a lifeline, when a rescue became the first page of a love story that would span decades. The bridge that had collapsed that day was long gone, replaced multiple times over the years, as Apache Junction grew from a rough mining town into a small city. But the story endured, a reminder that sometimes the obstacles we face are actually opportunities in disguise, that sometimes we need to fall before we can be caught, that sometimes the person who saves us is really the person we save. And in the desert, where the canyon still cuts through red rock like a wound, where the wind still whispers through juniper trees, and the sun still paints the rocks orange and gold at sunset, the story of Zachary Stone and Fiona Edwards lives on. A testament to love that bridges gaps, heals wounds, and endures long after the people who created it have returned to dust. It was a love story written in the hard years of the Wild West, between two people who had both been broken by life and who found wholeness in each other. Between a man who thought he would never love again and a woman who dared to show him he was wrong. Between a cowboy who rescued a schoolteacher from a broken bridge and a woman who bridged the gap in his lonely heart. And it was, in every sense that mattered, a story with a happy ending.